progress that is simply not made in this bill. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from Ohio.
Thanks, President. I rise today to discuss legislation I think that benefits all Americans, and that is particularly my home state of Ohio, the Farm Bill. I appreciate Senator Flake's comments. I've admired his integrity and his focus on waste in government for the decade or so that I've known him, longer than that. I think he makes some good points in this legislation. We come down on different sides in the end. Some of the things he talked about, eliminating a lot of the direct payments, were especially important, came out of legislation that Senator Thune and I did, and I think that this is an ongoing process to improve this bill every year, and I hope that every 5 years I'm hopeful we can do that. But I thank Senator Flake for his comments. This bill is bipartisan. It reduces the deficit. It helps farms. It helps families. It helps our economy. It helps our environment. It saves $23 billion, taxpayer dollars. It provides certainty and support to one of the nation's largest job creators, agriculture. Agriculture and related businesses like food processing, equipment, fertilizer, feed sales constitute Ohio's largest industry. Food and agriculture together are about 1 in 7 jobs in Ohio. I want to thank Senator Cochran and Senator Stabenow for getting us to this point. They've been dogged in their support for our nation's farmers, for rural communities. I thank them. I've spoken with Ohio's corn and soybean growers, as well as members of the Ohio Farm Bureau. I spoke on Friday, met with a group of 300 Farmers Union members in Columbus on Friday. They've told me the importance of passing a 5-year farm bill. They especially emphasize the certainty, finally, of this bill, that people can make the planning decisions that business people, that farmers, planning and planting decisions that business people and farmers need. I've traveled across Ohio's 88 counties and listened to farmers from Minster to Millersburg who've told me they want a leaner, more efficient, market-oriented farm safety net. Taxpayers deserve that, too. This bill is a reform bill. It eliminates direct payments. It links crop insurance to conservation compliance. It reforms our risk management programs, all important things in agriculture policy. Ohio farmers were clear they wanted a farm bill that eliminated those direct payments and provided the risk management tools they needed when times are bad, but without the market-distorting policies that ensure farmers are planning for the program and not the market. Unfortunately, that was happening far too often. In the last 6 or 7 years in the Senate, leading up to the 2007-8 Farm Bill and the 2014, 13 and 14 Farm Bill, if you were, I held some 25 roundtables with farmers and rural development people around my state. Working with colleagues Senator Thune and Senator Durbin, we were able to streamline the farm safety net and make it more market-oriented. It's the basis for the Agricultural Risk Coverage Program, which was included in the commodity title. By reforming commodity programs to better align with the market instead of simply sending out checks, even when times are good, in many cases to farmers who don't need them, this bill will provide farmers with improved risk management tools while improving the integrity of these programs. The bill incorporates many portions of the Local Farms, Food and Jobs Act that I introduced. We know too many farmers struggle to find local products for their markets, and too many Ohioans struggle to access fresh and affordable food. This legislation helps to put them together. We know what's happened in rural America in terms of rural development. While agriculture prices have been such and farmers have been prosperous enough that many in rural America are doing okay, rural development is still an issue as people move out of these communities looking for jobs. Whether it's bringing broadband to southeast Ohio or a water sewer project to Henry County or a low-interest loan to Buckeye Power, this bill will make sure rural communities have the tools and the programs and the capital they need. My state's home to approximately 130 companies that use agricultural crops to make new products ranging from natural pet foods to bio-based paint to soy ink to toner to plastics. Last week, Secretary Vilsack and I toured a Columbus plastic factory where they're working to make more of their products with bio-based feedstocks instead of oil. We know what that means for renewable energy in our state. We also know the importance of helping young farmers. You go to any farm organization meeting, farmers are typically in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. We don't see enough in their 20s and 30s and 40s. in this legislation. We will help to recruit and train and retrain the next generation of farmers. That's part of this, and USDA needs to redouble its efforts, particularly in making capital available to ensure that new farmers are able to succeed. The bill streamlines USDA's conservation programs. That is so important in the western Lake Erie Basin of the Great Lakes. We've seen what's happened with algae blooms sort of east of Toledo, along places like Port Clinton and Sandusky, and it's reaching almost as far east as Lorain, and the problems that causes to water quality, to recreation, and to development along the lake. That's so important. The House wanted, on the SNAP issue, the House wanted to slash food stamps by $40 billion. We fought back. Our conference committee rejected every proposal passed by the House to cut off assistance to workers and their families who have fallen on very hard times. This legislation, when you couple what some in this body want to do with cutting unemployment, failing to extend unemployment insurance, to failing to raise the minimum wage, to making huge cuts in food stamp programs, this was a huge victory in our conference committee. This bill needs to pass. I urge my colleagues in the Senate to pass it, to send it to President Obama so that he can sign this bill at the end of next week, this week, or the beginning of next week. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Well, the Senate is debating the Farm Bill today. A vote to move forward with the debate on the measure passed yesterday. Senators are expected to break for their weekly party lunches from 12:30 to 2:15 Eastern, and shortly after they return, at about 2:35, they'll vote on final passage of the nearly $1 trillion bill, which includes about $756 billion in nutrition assistance programs. Work today continuing on the Farm Bill. We expect a vote on final passage this afternoon at 2:35 Eastern. After that, the bill will be sent to the President's desk for his signature if it is approved here in the Senate.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call in progress be initiated.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, it's my understanding that Senator Bennett is going to be due here shortly. I should be through by that time, so I ask unanimous consent that I take Senator Cornyn's time, about 15 minutes.
Without objection.
All right. Mr. President, in January of 2014 may go down in record as the coldest of the months in United States history. Between the polar vortex storms of last week's freezing temperatures, much of the nation experienced cold weather in records at least once or twice. And this has been going on now for the last 3 years. So while we won't have official nationwide temperature data for January for a few more weeks, we do have preliminary figures. Throughout the entire month, over 2,387 daily cold temperature records were set around the country. Many of those were in my state of Oklahoma. At least 49 of these daily records occurred on January 6th and 7th when the first round of the polar vortex hit. Now, in Tulsa yesterday, it went down to 2 below zero. That was a record breaker that had held since 1912 was the last time it got that cold. The same day in Enid, Oklahoma, it got down to -3. In Bartlesville, and I think maybe this is wrong, but this is what the figure showed, that it was actually -14, making it even colder than the South Pole, where it was only -11. Now, the cold weather is continuing into February. Many schools canceled classes today around the state of Oklahoma because of the cold weather. It snowed more than 2.5 inches in Tulsa yesterday, 5.2 inches in Henrietta, just south of Tulsa. And yesterday it was so cold. You know, there's an article in the Daily Oklahoman that said that they have a great zoo over there, but the grizzly bears refused to go outside of their habitat yesterday because it was just too cold. Now, I know many in the media, they cry foul when I talk about global warming when it gets cold outside, but is this really any different than what the President said, was talking about global warming on a hot day in June of last year when he announced his climate action plan? No one seemed to mind that. But it seems to be a different set of rules when we talk about how cold it's been, which has been for the last 3 years. When we experience extreme cold like we've had the last few weeks, I think everyone in their right mind takes a step back and wonders, is global warming really happening? When you look at the facts, you just have to wonder. Consider this quote from the journal Nature, which stated that over the last 15 years, and this is a quote, the observed temperature trend is not significantly different from zero and suggests a temporary hiatus in global warming. Now, we go back, and this is something that has been a pattern for a long period of time. I can recall, and I'm going from memory now, from the time that they started keeping these temperatures, we started the first cold spell of recent history in 1895. That lasted to 1918. 1918 turned into another warming area that went to 1945. 1945 to 1975. They used that was another cooling spell, and of course from 1975 to 2000. So we know what has been happening. Now, the President has not acknowledged this fact. In fact, on multiple occasions, he has said, and this is a quote that he's used over and over again, the temperature, quote, the temperature around the globe is increasing faster than was predicted even 10 years ago. Now, unfortunately, for his talking points, the data has been reported in Nature magazine, The Economist, and even in the United Nations IPCC report show that it's just simply not true. 2 weeks ago, in a hearing we had in the Environment and Public Works Committee, my friend Senator Sessions pressed the EPA Administrator, Gina McCarthy, on this point, asking her whether or not the President's statement was true. And she ultimately said, after running around the question for a few minutes, I just can't answer that. And you may not think that this is an important fact, but it is. The President's entire climate action plan and efforts to regulate carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases is built fully on the fact that global warming is happening and that we're all going to die if we don't do something about it. But what we all need to be aware of is that the impact of the President's climate action plan, when implemented, will be stunning. It will completely adopt global warming policies and the implementation of regulations like cap and trade. The President has already done a stunning amount of this work already. We have been able to uncover that in the first 4 years that he was in office, he actually had spent, and people are not aware of this, $110 billion of taxpayers' money on the global warming related activities. The cap-and-trade legislation that we debated for over the last 10 years carries a price tag of $300 to $400 billion a year. It would have been the largest tax increase in American history. Soundly defeated a bill in the Senate, but the climate action plan the President is now trying to accomplish is by regulation, what he couldn't achieve through legislation. You know, you've heard the term being used recently, the imperial president. And I think if you saw what was stated in the State of the Union message, was he was talking about, and this is the words that he said, we're going to set new standards on carbon pollution from power plants. Well, what he's saying is we couldn't pass it for 12 years. We had 4 bills to do that. We can't get more than 25% of the people to vote for it, so we're going to do it through regulation. Now, the first round of greenhouse gas regulations were first proposed in the first week in January. These regulations, if finalized, would impose strict regulations on new power plants that would make it impossible to build a coal-fired power plant. And you may wonder, do we really need coal anymore with all the new energy we have coming on the market with the natural gas and the shale deposits and all that? And the answer is yes. Before I go into that discussion, I think it's important to point out a problem with the timing of the new rules proposal. I had a chart here that I don't have with me right now, but when I was ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee, this would have been way back in October of 2012. We released a report highlighting the administration's actions to delay the finalization of costly environmental regulations until after the 2012 presidential elections. Whether it was the farm dust rule or the ozone standard, the President punted the regulation after regulation until after the election and to minimize the influence that would have had on voters. It appears that that's exactly what's happening today. With the first round of greenhouse gas regulations for the construction of new power plants, as we know, under the Clean Air Act, new rules for power plants must be finalized within 1 year of the proposal's publication in the Federal Register. That's what kicks it off, when it's written in the Federal Register, or the proposed rule is invalidated. Now, this is important because after announcing his climate action plan, the President ordered the EPA to, quote, issue a new proposal by no later than September 20th, 2013. The EPA proposed a new rule on September 20th, but it did not publish in the Federal Register until January 8th of 2014, this past January. Now, had the EPA published this rule in the Register on the same day proposed it, on September 20th of 2013, it would have been forced to finalize the rule by September 20th, 2014, which would be 6 weeks before the 2014 elections. Now, this reveals an astounding double standard and is consistent with the remarks of the State of the Union. On the one hand, the President says we don't have time to delay action on global warming. He says we must act before it's too late. But on the other hand, his actions show that it's okay to wait to finalize rules that will harm the economy until after the elections. Ultimately, this hypocrisy reveals that the administration is fully aware that the EPA's greenhouse gas regulations will put a drag on the economy, and now we're starting to see strains of our electricity markets develop. The cost is becoming real to consumers. Consider American Electric Power, one of the country's largest electric companies, and they're the ones that actually supply the power for my state of Oklahoma. Last week, during the recent cold weather, they reported that they were running 89% of the coal generation it's scheduled to retire in 2015. But these coal-fired power plants, which were critical to keeping homes all around the country warm during the cold temperatures, are going to be shut down because of Obama's environmental regulations. The American Electric Powers said, and this is a quote, he said, what it should make everyone think about is what are we going to do when the generation is not available? We need to be thinking about reliability and resilience in extreme times, not just the status quo. If this recent cold weather occurs again in a year or two from now, once these plants are shut down, there simply will not be enough electricity available to keep homes and businesses warm. If cold weather pushes electricity demand up to the point where remaining power plants are overloaded, the ones that haven't been shut down by the president, it could result in massive blackouts. And when Americans need their electricity, it won't be there. It would be as if we were living in the 1600s and everyone would be cold. Again, the annual cost of this would be in excess of $300 to $400 billion. That would be a hit on the GDP and not even begin to measure the suffering that we would have to experience. Now, the president, like he's done with Obamacare, may just say that these plants can stay open and that he won't enforce these new rules that he's created. But I don't think that's realistic. The American Electric Power's warning comes in the wake of regulations the president has already finalized. The new ones that are being developed will make things even worse by making coal-fired power plants impossible to build or keep open. What has been a steady source of cheap electricity will be gone in just a few short years. I've long said that the Clean Air Act was never intended to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. It was written only to include most egregious, harmful air pollutants, not carbon dioxide and other harmless greenhouse gases. Now, surprisingly, even some Democrats are starting to publicly agree with me. Congressman John Dingell from Michigan, a staunch Democrat, said last week at an Energy and Commerce Committee that was over in the House this is a quote from John Dingell, quote, like most members of this committee, I think the Supreme Court came up with a very much erroneous decision on whether the Clean Air Act covers greenhouse gases. Like many members of this committee, I was present. This is John Dingell talking. I was present when we wrote that legislation, and we thought it was clear enough that we didn't have to clarify it, thinking that even the Supreme Court was not stupid enough to make that finding. And that was John Dingell. That's a direct quote that he made. So I wish the Supreme Court would have sided with Congressman Dingell. As things now stand, the EPA is poised to put the nation out of business with greenhouse gas regulations that would cost the entire economy some $300 to $400 billion. You know, I put that, I always calculate every year the number of people in my state of Oklahoma that file federal income taxes. This $300 to $400 billion cost would mean about $3,000 for a per family that files a federal income tax. So it's a huge amount. It'd be the largest tax increase in history. Now, out of this concern, I'm introducing a common sense bill today, the Electricity Reliability and Affordability Act, which will allow states to keep their power plants open if they believe it's necessary to maintain electricity reliability and affordability. In other words, the states can opt out. The American Electric Power's announcement should cause all of us a great concern, but the EPA is not listening. States have long protected and conserved their environments with great success, and state governments are in a much better position to determine which power plants should and should not remain open despite the regulations. The last thing I would say, because I know my friend from Colorado is wanting to get the floor, is that in the State of the Union message, when he made this statement, the President made this statement, he's going to go ahead and do it regardless of the fact that we have killed this legislation 4 times over the last 12 years. And I was talking about $300 to $400 billion as the cost. That would have been the cost if this had been legislation, because legislation specifically talked about, as in the Lieberman-Warner Act and some of the others, that it would regulate sources with at least 10,000 tons of CO2 emissions. However, if you do it by regulation and not legislation, that would have to be under the Clean Air Act, which would regulate systems of 250 tons of CO2 a year. So while the legislation would have regulated the CO2 emissions for power plants, refineries, and major factories, if he's able to do it through regulations, that would cover every school, every church, and every apartment house in the nation. So it's very significant, and I know that right now we're on the Farm Bill, but we've got to remind people that this is something that has been just announced that they're going to be doing, and this is something that by their own admission, and I'll wind up with this. I can remember when Lisa Jackson was the director of the EPA. She was appointed by President Obama. And I asked her the question that if we even do this, if we are to regulate this, and one of these bills would pass, which means we'd be regulating CO2 emissions, would this have the effect of reducing CO2 worldwide? She said no, because that would only apply to the United States of America. That's not where the problem is. The problem's in China, in India, in Mexico, and other places. So I remind us, my fellow members, that this is something that's very serious that's coming up that is worthy of consideration at this time. I'll yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank my friend from Oklahoma for yielding. And I would like to talk today briefly about the Farm Bill, a measure that, thanks to months and months, actually years of tireless work by Chairwoman Stabenow, Ranking Member Cochran, and the other conferees on the bill, Democrats and Republicans in both houses of Congress. Thanks to all of that work, we're going to be able to pass this bill this afternoon. There's 16 million people, Mr. President, working in agriculture in our country today. These workers in our rural communities are demanding the certainty that comes with a long-term bill, and I'm pleased to say that we are passing not a 2-month extension, not a 10-minute extension, not a I hope we get it done tomorrow before we leave town extension, but a genuine good 5-year farm bill, which is going to give us a lot of certainty. This bill eliminates direct payments made to farmers regardless of market conditions or what they planted, and prioritizes what is working for producers, namely crop insurance. Mr. President, I've spoken on the floor before about Colorado's battle against historic drought conditions. Some of our farmers, I'm just going to show you, Mr. President, some of our farmers have lost half their corn yields in 2012. It's hard to imagine any business losing half its production in 1 year, but that's what's happened to many Colorado corn producers. 2013 was a little better for corn in our state, but it's hard to celebrate when producers still face significant losses fighting against this dry soil. The crop insurance program is what's keeping these farmers and rural economies in business in these tough times, and that's why it's a priority. That's why we should have passed it a year ago, 2 years ago, but today we finally have the chance to do it. Beyond crop insurance, another key highlight of this bill is its conservation title. I spoke last week on the floor about the revamped easement programs and the important linkage between conservation practices and crop insurance that has been preserved in this conference agreement. But beyond those highlights, the bill places a new emphasis on water conservation, which is so important to the West. Programs like EQIP and the Regional Conservation Partnerships Program are going to be critical as the West faces record drought conditions brought on by climate change. New conservation tools coupled with crop insurance to help hedge risk will help our producers as we move into a new normal of a drier American West. The conservation title programs help producers, but they also help the fish in our rivers and the wildlife on our lands. Here's a good illustration, Mr. President. Here's a great illustration of why sportsman groups support this bill. This is a photo taken of my friend John Gale hunting pheasants in Yuma County, Colorado. The Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, a program reauthorized through this farm bill, provides important habitat for pheasants and other upland birds all across the country. The land surrounding this photo is all CRP land. The program protects not only habitats, Mr. President, but also helps hold highly erodible soils in place, like the soil in Baca County, Colorado, where over 250,000 acres are enrolled in CRP. As you may know, Baca County in many ways was the epicenter of the area that was devastated by the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Thanks to CRP, Baca County has weathered recent droughts a lot better than their forefathers did. Mr. President, healthy grasslands, open landscapes, and abundant wildlife are a fundamental part of what it is to be in the West, to be a part of the West. And we need to preserve those grasslands, those open spaces, and our species. And that's what the conservation title of the Farm Bill does. A lot of people don't know about it. It's a very important part of the Farm Bill. As a result, this Farm Bill is supported by over 250 conservation and environmental organizations, groups like Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, National Wildlife Federation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and the National Rifle Association, among others. Mr. President, this legislation not only ensures that we have healthy croplands and grasslands, but also prioritizes the health of our forests, an issue of huge importance to Western states as we deal with our massive wildfires. Here you can see the Waldo Canyon fire from 2012. I chair the Agriculture Subcommittee on Forestry, and we did a hearing on wildfires not too long ago. We looked at the terrible fires that have raged across the West and the budgetary nightmare that they have caused and Washington's inability to understand what we're actually facing out there. And my clearest takeaway from this hearing was that when it comes to our forests, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we prioritize the fuel mitigation work on the front end, we will save on fire suppression and recovery costs on the back end. And if we don't, we will break our budget and not preserve our forests. The Congressional Budget Office has found that for every dollar we invest in forest health, we save $5 in costs associated with wildfire. This Farm Bill conference report makes these investments and gives the Forest Service new tools to treat areas in need of restoration and mitigation. This bill makes common sense reforms, Mr. President. This bill reduces the deficit, and it will bring certainty and continued prosperity to rural America. It passed the House last week with broad bipartisan support. I strongly urge a yes vote when we get onto the Farm Bill conference report later today. With all the uncertainty that our farmers and ranchers are facing in these tough times, in these drought times, it's the least that we can do. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague and friend from Colorado for his words about the Farm Bill. He and I are an example of how this bill is important to every region of the country. His kind of farming is very different than our kind of farming, but they're equally important to our states. And I rise today to talk about the Farm Bill. Mr. President, this bill is a long time in coming. There's been back and forth between the chambers, the two chambers, the House and Senate, between various regions, and probably most famously South versus Midwest farming. But that's not the only one. Different types of crops and different types of farm products, and it may be sugar or milk or, you know, who knows, soybeans or corn or who knows what it's going to be. But nonetheless, Mr. President, I'm happy to report that finally this bill overcame the partisan gridlock we've seen here in Washington. I'm sorry it took so long. I know that last year the House basically blew up this bill on kind of basis of my way or highway politics. I thought that was very, very unfortunate. But here we are today with a bipartisan farm bill, one that got a huge vote in the House, and I hope it'll get a huge vote in the Senate. And I'm glad that this cut, cut, cut ideology did not prevail, because when you look at this bill and how important it is, not just to my state, but to every state in the Union, so important to the U.S. economy. This bill is very important to the nation's economy and to the future of our nation. Agriculture is something, Mr. President, that we do in this country better than anybody else in the world. We do a lot of things great in this country, and we should be proud of those. But no one does agriculture better than the good old United States of America. Our farmers, our producers, our agribusiness, they do incredible work. We literally are the envy of the world. It's a core strength of the U.S. economy. It's critical to keep our nation's economy strong that we have a strong agriculture sector. It's critical to our nation that we have strong rural communities. And to a large extent, that is a lot, at least, not completely, but a lot of what this bill is about is helping rural communities. Not everyone in this country lives in the big cities or lives in the suburbs. This bill will help every American, no matter where they live, whether they live in the biggest city in the country or the smallest town out in the countryside. This will help every single American in lots of ways, but it will also help millions and millions of hardworking people and their families in rural America. And why in the world would we want to let ideological fights and partisan bickering jeopardize this economic powerhouse that we built for ourselves? But nonetheless, today, we've overcome that. This legislation is a win-win for everyone. We've seen Democrats and Republicans, folks from all regions of the country come to the floor today to talk about this farm bill and why it's important to them and why it's important that we pass. Just a few of the provisions in there. There's market protections for our farmers and ranchers all over the country. The PILT program, which is so critical to a lot of western states, but certainly a number of our counties in Arkansas, that's the payment in lieu of taxes. If you have a lot of federal land in your county, we have counties in our state where literally half of their land or more is in federal land, and they can't get any tax base off of that. So PILT helps to fix that. The catfish inspection program, we don't subsidize catfish, but we do the inspection program here to make sure that the imported catfish meets U.S. standards. That's critical. We want that safe and good food supply here. There's a big emphasis here, Mr. President, on exports. And we all know that we have a terrible trade deficit. Our trade deficit would be horrendous if it wasn't for agriculture. And, of course, there's nutritional assistance for hardworking families here in this country. And let me tell you, we have the richest, most bountiful, most blessed nation in the world, in the history of the world. And we have people here who are hungry, and those nutrition programs, in many cases, are the difference in life and death. This bill also focuses on conservation. Not everyone's a farmer, but there are millions of people all over this country that love to enjoy the great outdoors. They like to go hunting, they like to go fishing, and all these other activities. Those conservation programs are critical to keep that habitat where it is and critical for large sections of our economy. That hunting and fishing, that's a huge part of our economy, not just in Arkansas, but all over the country. And a couple of other things. The rural development programs are essential for rural America. We know that there's everything from wastewater programs in there to rural housing to all kinds of things. But those rural development programs are critical for the quality of life in rural America. Mr. President, I stand here today and I'm going to be the first to tell you this bill isn't perfect. I think all of us agree that this is a series of compromises. There's probably things, if each one of us could do it, we might change a provision or two in the bill. But I also say that it's a good bill. It's going to provide and stabilize good jobs and economic security for our country. Our agriculture producers not only feed us and clothe us, but they feed and clothe the world. And we hear every day here in the United States Senate from the business community, they want more certainty, they want more stability. Well, this bill provides that in the agriculture economy. Our farmers and our producers and others, they deserve that same certainty and stability, and this bill provides that. Mr. President, in closing, I just want to do a quick passage from James 5:7. And I was going to read it in the King James, but I'll go ahead and read it in this kind of a paraphrase edition. Be patient, therefore, brothers. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and late rains. Our agriculture producers have been patient long enough. They've waited and waited and waited on this legislation. I sincerely hope that all of us will give this bill strong consideration. This is a bill that's provided good common ground. It provides economic security. It continues the safe and abundant food supply that we have in this nation, and I hope that members of both sides of the aisle will join me in voting yes for this today. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nebraska.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, rise today to speak on the Farm Bill. Like many Nebraskans, I'm relieved that a final conference agreement has been reached, which will provide much-needed certainty for both producers and consumers. This legislation accomplishes a great deal. It provides risk management and disaster assistance programs. It promotes environmental stewardship. It bolsters export opportunities. It encourages rural development, advances research, helps beginning farmers and ranchers, and delivers nutrition assistance to our needy families. While the bill is not perfect, it is the result of compromise and a long, collaborative legislative process. One of the most challenging issues for lawmakers was addressing nutrition assistance programs. That comprises 80% of the Farm Bill's total spending. With 1 in every 7 Americans receiving supplemental nutrition assistance, it is important to strengthen the program's integrity and its accountability, while better targeting programs to serve those in need. I'm also pleased that the bill empowers states to help capable adults enroll in work programs to reduce reliance on taxpayer assistance. The bill provides tools to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse, including cracking down on trafficking through data mining, terminal ID, and other measures. While these are all steps in the right direction, it is disappointing that the bill will not achieve additional savings from nutrition programs, which are projected to cost more than $756 billion over the next decade. True farm programs, the commodity programs and crop insurance, only comprise about 14% of all the Farm Bill spending, but they account for more than half of the savings under this proposed bill. In fact, the commodity title contributes more savings than any other title in the entire Farm Bill. The legislation makes significant reforms to farm policy. Direct payments are repealed and replaced with risk management. That offers protection only when warranted by significant price or revenue declines. In Nebraska, agriculture is our #1 industry, and it's one that we are very, very proud of. Our farmers and ranchers take on an enormous amount of risk. They endure the elements every day as they work to feed the world and responsibly take care of our natural resources. I'm pleased that this Farm Bill maintains and strengthens one of the most important risk management tools for our farmers, and that is crop insurance. This is a very successful public-private partnership that helps farmers invest in their own risk management by purchasing insurance policies so they are protected from adverse weather or market conditions. This legislation also provides needed disaster assistance to livestock producers. Unfortunately, the Livestock Forage Program and the Livestock Indemnity Program both expired in 2011 under the last Farm Bill. In 2012, livestock producers experienced the most devastating loss of pasture, rangeland, and forage in decades due to widespread drought, affecting approximately 80% of our country. And then in October of 2013, an unexpected early fall blizzard killed more than 20,000 cattle, sheep, horses, and bison in the Dakotas and in my state of Nebraska. While those affected by these hardships have been without assistance for more than 2 years, this farm bill will now help producers to rebuild those herds and sustain their ranching operations. I also appreciate that this farm bill continues our commitment to strong conservation programs. The bill consolidates and it streamlines those programs, providing landowners with incentives and insistence to protect and improve our land, our water, and our air. Agriculture continues to be a bright spot for U.S. trade, thanks in part to the successful export promotion programs, and those are reauthorized in this bill as well. An independent study conducted for USDA in 2010 found that for every dollar expended by government and industry on market development, U.S. food and agricultural exports increased by $35. Through the Market Access Program and Foreign Market Development Program, we can expect increased demand for U.S.-grown agricultural products and commodities. This farm bill also continues investment in rural development, providing assistance to communities to build that very, very critical infrastructure and access to credit to help grow small businesses. Also supported by this farm bill are critical agricultural research initiatives, which allow American producers to innovate, to become more efficient and productive with fewer and fewer resources. Moreover, the bill also provides support for developing technologies that reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Finally, this bill provides some needed regulatory relief for the agricultural industry. I was very pleased that the bill includes an amendment that I offered to fix the bureaucratic hurdles impacting farmers' access to seeds. This bipartisan amendment, co-sponsored by Senator Carper, ensures that EPA does not treat biotech seeds as pesticides when those shipments are imported. I was disappointed, though, that the conference did not include language to address one of the worst regulatory challenges confronting farmers: EPA's overregulation of on-farm fuel storage under its Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasure program. The House Farm Bill included an SPCC relief provision, and the Senate unanimously passed a similar amendment that I co-sponsored to reduce farmers' SPCC compliance burdens during consideration of the Water Resources Development Act. There's bipartisan agreement on both sides of the dome that this regulation needs to be fixed. The Farm Bill did provide, I think, the perfect opportunity that we could get this relief enacted into law, but that chance was missed. However, I do stand ready to work with my colleagues to ensure that we don't miss another opportunity to address this issue, to fix this issue, and we can do that during the WRDA conference. As I said, this bill is not perfect, but on balance, this Farm Bill goes a long way in promoting opportunity and providing certainty for both producers and consumers. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting the final passage of the Farm Bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa.
I come to the floor for the third time to express my opposition to the Farm Bill, obviously not in its total, but certain provisions of it, particularly provisions that I had a hand in writing. And to set the record straight once again, I come here because several of my colleagues have approached me indicating confusion on whether the payment limits provisions I fought for are in this bill or not in this bill. Well, people are going to tell you there are payment limitations in this bill, but I'm here to set the record straight with facts that they don't accomplish what I tried to accomplish, and they're even much more liberal than in existing law and in regard to my amendment. My original payment limit provisions included a $50,000 individual, $100,000 married couple cap for shallow loss programs known as price loss coverage, PLC, and agricultural risk coverage, ARC programs. In this bill, farmers will have to pick one of those programs for the next 5 years. The conference report allows individual farmers to get $125,000 and married couples to get $250,000 from the PLC and the ARC program. Now, this is where this has really exploded, because what I just gave you is a 150% increase over what my limits allowed. The limits that passed the Senate without discussion and limits that were adopted in the House of Representatives on a 230 to 194 vote. That is just a plain, simple fact. 150% increase over what my limits allowed. The conference report allows the PLC and ARC programs to pay out 150% more than my limits did. This intentional change by the conference committee allows each farmer to get significantly more from these new countercyclical programs that are not even World Trade Organization, or as we say around here, WTO compliant. Another way of looking at this, under the 2008 Farm Bill, an individual farmer could only get $65,000 from the countercyclical program. Under this bill, they can get $125,000 from the countercyclical program. That means they almost doubled what the countercyclical programs will pay out compared to current law. Furthermore, some university analysis has already shown the high target prices for certain crops in this bill will likely have a 70 to 80% chance of triggering payments through the PLC program any given year of this farm bill. So, colleagues, please don't buy what my opponents are selling on this issue, or at least trying to sell to you. My payment limits are not in this bill. The result of that is going to be a countercyclical program that will be much more market distorting than the current ones for a few crops. How can it not be more distorting? The PLC program is designed to trigger more often and pay out larger amounts than the old countercyclical program for certain crops in the 2008 Farm Bill. That is just a plain, simple fact. I'm sorry if opponents are having a tough time acknowledging that publicly, but that is what this bill actually does. Their bill does lots of things, but brilliantly reforming Title I is not one of them. And I'm sure we've been told that this bill reforms. It's like some of the opponents of payment limits still think that this is 1975 or some year back then. Back then, the national debt was still measured in billions, and the WTO didn't even exist. Unfortunately for them, things are very different today. Recently, the WTO declared our cotton program non-compliant, and we happen to have a $17 trillion national debt. But worse than this, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that these amendments were adopted on the floor of the United States Senate. They were adopted in the House of Representatives by a 230 to 194 vote. They should not even been subject to negotiations. The moral authority of the people of the United States were behind what both houses did, because we have a $17 trillion national debt. We ought to be able to save these $387 billion, or $387 million that this amendment would have saved. It had the moral authority of a majority of the House and the Senate, which moral authority should not have been overridden by a handful of people sitting in conference. And I stress this latter point for one simple reason. Rule 28 of the United States Senate says that if things are the same in both houses, they should not be conferenceable. I say this to my friends, not that this bill is going to go down to defeat and we start over again and maybe accomplish what I want to accomplish, but to make sure that other conferences don't abuse the Senate rule like this conference abused the Senate rule, and also to tell my colleagues here that both working with what rules maybe we can get through the U.S. Department of Agriculture or on some other piece of legislation, I intend to pursue these goals that I sought, and I intend to keep reminding my colleagues of Senate rules being violated by conferees that should not have been violated. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to discuss the many ways that Obamacare continues to negatively affect Americans. Yesterday, the Washington Post published an article exposing yet another problem with healthcare.gov, and I'd like to just share a couple of excerpts from that. The article begins, and I quote, "Tens of thousands of people who discovered that healthcare.gov made mistakes as they were signing up for a health plan are confronting a new roadblock. The government cannot yet fix the errors. Roughly 22,000 Americans have filed appeals with the government to try and get mistakes corrected. Those mistakes, according to the Post, include being overcharged for health insurance, being directed to the wrong insurance program, or being wrongly denied coverage." So what's the status of those appeals? Well, the Post reports, and I quote again, "For now, the appeals are sitting, untouched, inside a government computer, and an unknown number of consumers who are trying to get help through less formal means by calling the healthcare marketplace directly are told that healthcare.gov's computer system is not yet allowing federal workers to go into enrollment records and change them." So let me summarize here, Mr. President. 22,000 Americans are either without insurance or are paying too much for insurance as a result of mistakes made by the Federal Health Exchange. Healthcare.gov contains no appeal process. Attempts to find recourse by other means have been unsuccessful, and the administration's response is basically tough luck. President Obama was interviewed by Fox News' Bill O'Reilly this weekend. One of the topics they covered was healthcare.gov's problems. The president said, and I quote, "The good news is that right away we decided how we're going to fix it. It got fixed within a month and a half. It was up and running, and now it's working the way it's supposed to." Let me repeat that, Mr. President. The President of the United States said, now it's working the way it's supposed to. Well, tell that to the 22,000 people wondering why there's no appeals process on the website, or why their paper appeals are stuck in a computer system at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where, the Post says, the appeals process is currently stopped because the part of the computer system that would allow agency workers to read and handle appeals has not been built, end quote. When Bill O'Reilly asked President Obama about the website problems, the President responded by saying that, and I quote again, "I don't think anybody anticipated the degree of problems that you had on healthcare.gov," end quote. Well, Mr. President, that's not an excuse. It was the President's job to ensure that people in the administration were anticipating the problems that would occur. And the President owes the American people an explanation of why he didn't, because this isn't just a story of bureaucratic incompetence. It's the stories of the tens of thousands of individual Americans who are suffering as a result of the website glitches and who are wondering how they'll afford their health care under Obamacare. Americans like Addie Wilson, whose story is highlighted in the Post article. Addie is a 27-year-old who makes just $22,000 a year. She was sure she would qualify for a subsidy on the exchanges, and she was absolutely right. She did. Only healthcare.gov didn't tell her that. So Addie phoned one of the call centers, which told her to sign up at the more expensive price she was quoted and to appeal the decision later. Since her old insurance plan was on its way out, she needed surgery in January. That's what she did. Now she's stuck paying $100 more a month than she should be paying, along with a deductible that's $4,000 higher than it should be. That too high of a deductible is a particular concern since she incurred huge hospital bills in January when she was forced to have surgery. If she doesn't get relief from the appeals process, she could end up paying $4,000 in medical bills that she shouldn't have to pay and can't afford. But, Mr. President, it's not just the website that's driving up Americans' medical bills. It's the law itself. As awful as Addie's situation is, at least maybe she will get help eventually. For millions of other Americans, their high deductibles are no mistake. For too many Americans on and off the exchanges, the reality of the so-called Affordable Care Act has been a staggering increase in health care costs. Some family plans on the exchanges carry deductibles of almost $13,000. That's more than some families will spend this year on their mortgage. Upper-income families may be able to absorb these costs, and some limited help is available for lower-income families. But what middle-class family can afford $13,000 a year in medical costs? Too many families around the country will be putting on hold their plans to buy a home or send their kids to college because they have to devote every spare dollar to paying their health care bills. And on top of crippling cost hikes, many of these same families are facing the loss of doctors and hospitals as insurance companies narrow their networks in response to Obamacare's mandates. Mr. President, so far I've only mentioned the personal devastation Obamacare is causing, but Obamacare isn't just affecting families' pocketbooks. It's affecting the economy as a whole. In response to Obamacare's burdensome mandates and new taxes, businesses are cutting employees' hours, declining to hire new employees, and abandoning their plans to expand. And that means fewer jobs available for millions of Americans looking for work and fewer opportunities for career growth and advancement. In fact, just this morning, Mr. President, there was a story, the Wall Street Journal, and it references the Congressional Budget Office report that estimates now that the impact of this law through the year 2024 will mean 2.5 million fewer jobs. 2.5 million in job losses as a result of Obamacare. It's so much so that you see many of the very labor unions who supported and wholeheartedly endorsed Obamacare when it passed coming out now and saying that it's a sad irony, and I'm quoting here from a letter that went out from several of the labor unions, it would be a sad irony indeed if the signature legislative accomplishment of an administration committed to reducing income inequality cut living standards for middle-income and low-wage workers. The letter went on to say that the Obamacare law undermines fair market competition and that they are bitterly disappointed. This comes from labor unions in this country, Mr. President, who wholeheartedly endorsed this law when it passed several years ago. Well, Mr. President, the American people have endured 5 years of economic stagnation, and Obamacare has been making things worse. The President has called for 2014 to be a year of action, but I've seen no evidence that he has any plans to address the causes of our sluggish growth or provide relief for the millions of Americans struggling with crippling health care costs. Republicans have a number of health care proposals, from comprehensive plans like that proposed by Senators Coburn, Hatch, and Burr, to common sense ideas to lower costs by allowing businesses to pool together, to negotiate lower rates, and by allowing insurance companies to sell health care plans across state lines, to promote more competition, give people more choices. If the President really wanted to make health care more affordable and accessible, he'd abandon this government takeover of 1/6 of our economy and work with Republicans to pass real health care reform. But, Mr. President, given the President's record, I'm not holding my breath that that's going to happen. But at the very least, I hope the President will see his way to supporting bipartisan proposals to improve the economy and to open new jobs and opportunities to struggling Americans. Just last Friday, the Obama State Department released its 5th environmental impact study on the Keystone XL pipeline. Once again, the review found that the pipeline would have no significant impact on global carbon emissions. Senators and representatives of both parties support this job-creating measure. It is high time for the President to approve the pipeline and to open up the 42,000 shovel-ready jobs it will support. He should also pick up the phone that he keeps talking about to call the Senate Majority Leader and to tell him to stop obstructing bipartisan Trade Promotion Authority legislation that would help American farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs, and job creators gain access to 1 billion new consumers around the globe. The President and the Majority Leader held a White House meeting yesterday, we're told, yet an aide reported that there was no discussion of the Majority Leader's anti-trade comments last week. Well, Mr. President, given this legislation's importance for increasing American jobs, it's difficult to understand why the President wouldn't bring this bill up at that meeting. Finally, Mr. President, the President of the United States also should join the vast bipartisan majority in the Senate that supports repeal of the job-killing Obamacare medical device tax, which is forcing American companies to send jobs overseas. The President will be visiting the Democrats' retreat tomorrow, which would be a prime opportunity for him to get on the same page with his party in support of these bipartisan measures. Mr. President, Republicans are ready and willing to work with the President and with Democrats, and we hope that we will have willing partners to do the things that are necessary to get people back to work, to create jobs, to grow our economy, and to help provide and build a better future for middle-class families in this country. The American people shouldn't have to wait any longer. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Republican whip. Mr. President, once again, the President of the United